Hanay na ora ya inire Isabela.
Na ora.
Iraima, lagayie ira yo akara asfaili ha elianane.
Eliana ora sa.
Rai ora, tahalila waite. Back to English. So what
Arne?
What?
Arne?
'Cause it's easier.
Iane.
Well, for the viewers watching, of course.
Ja aini ha Eliana ara. Ta iram di ira ha Ælis.
Ja te jo enta jo ersa ha up aira eva ja aima loligaji ira sa.
Ira, ta isa.
Thank you. So as I was saying, what I'd like to do today is take a step back from grammar and do a little pronunciation video. Have a look at these two words. Or these two. And these. Don't pay attention to what they mean, that's not relevant. No, have a look at the sounds they're composed of and compare them. In Ælis, it's important that every written sound is pronounced, which means that the top row and the bottom row of these words can't be pronounced the same. That brings us to today's topic, which coincidentally is the title of this video, Adjacent Identical Letters. More specifically, how to pronounce them. Before we continue, it's important to note that we are talking about the pronunciation of two adjacent identical letters if these belong to different syllables or root words. There are only two cases in the entire language where adjacent identical letters can belong to the same root word, and we've discussed their pronunciation in video 21. The root words in question are these. The root word on the left is the target particle and is romanized with two I's. It may be pronounced in a variety of ways, ranging from yi over to yi, ji, or ji. Please try to refrain from saying a full-on G like the letter G. Keep that initial sound a bit more subtle and the vowel short, yi. The root word on the right is romanized with two U's and is pronounced like woo, kind of like the English word woo, but again with a shorter vowel, woo. The root word woo currently doesn't have a meaning, but nothing excludes it from becoming a meaningful root word in the future. Anyway, those root words are not the ones we want to focus on today. We'll focus on words like these instead, words where you have the same letters side by side belonging to different root words. So let's get rid of again Ælis for a bit and focus only on the romanization. These are the sounds found naturally in Ælis written in their romanized form. In case a sound appears twice in a row but each belongs to a different root word, then Ælis has 4 different methods of ensuring that both sounds are audible. These methods are elongation or gemination, with a simpler word lengthening of the sound, turning the two sounds into one ejective, putting a schwa or another unstressed semi-vowel in between, and simply putting a glottal stop or brief pause between the two sounds. These techniques are shown in order of preference, but not every technique can be used for any sound. The first method, gemination, is also marginally present in English. You can distinctly hear how a consonant must sometimes be stretched in order to keep it apart from another word or word combination without a lengthened sound. For example, compare unnamed with unnamed, or this in with this sin. We also find examples of gemination in words like prime minister or solely, where the consonant sound is clearly held for a longer time than usual. In Ælis, gemination or lengthening can be applied firstly to the nasal consonants, which in Ælis are M and N. Next, it can be used for the so-called lateral approximant, which is the letter L. Then we have the alveolar flap, R, which will turn into an alveolar trill, R. Furthermore, gemination can happen with the sibilant and non-sibilant fricatives, which in Ælis are the letters H, S, Z, F, and V. The second method is creating an ejective. This method may be applied to the voiceless stops of Ælis. These are Q or the K sound, the T sound, and the P sound. Infixing a schwa or another unstressed semi-vowel may be done for all consonants, which means that this is the preferred method for the remaining consonants in the Ælis inventory. These are the voiced stops, G, D, and B. The last method is to simply split the syllables with a brief pause or a glottal stop. A glottal stop can be found in the word uh-oh This technique can be used with all letters, which covers the remaining group, the vowels. So let's look at some examples. What does it sound like? Want to repeat after me?
Allora,
The word on the left is ama.
amma,
The word on the right is amma.
amma,
Very good. Next one. On the left we have ainai.
ainai,
And on the right, ainai.
ainai,
Yep, that's it. An example with the letter L. Elle, elle.
elle, elle,
The next one is the alveolar flap, r, which turns into a trill, r. So, iri on the left, iri on the right. Now, since Ælis aims to be accessible to a variety of foreign learners, the letter ore may be pronounced a variety of ways too. The preferred pronunciation is the alveolar tap, r, but it may also be an alveolar trill, r, a uvular trill, r, a uvular fricative, r, or the classic rhotic r found in English. So if your standard way of pronouncing this letter is any other than the alveolar tap, r, then just make sure to lengthen the consonant sufficiently as to make the distinction clear.
iri, irri,
Exactly. Then we have the H sound. Ihi, ihi.
ihi, ihi,
Great. Now the aspirated H may also be a challenge to some speakers. I'm thinking about Spanish, French, or Portuguese speakers, for example. Those who have trouble with the simple glottal fricative, h, can resort to a fiercer sound, perhaps, like h, or also ch. Ihi, ichi. The next sound is the S sound. Osso, osso.
osso, osso,
Perfect. A small side note, if we romanize a cluster like osso, we might put an apostrophe in between to distinguish it from the sh sound, which is also transcribed with a double S. The apostrophe indicates that it's not a digraph, but two separate S's. Then we have the letter Z, like for example, ozo on the left
ozo,
and ozo on the right.
ozo,
Yep, great. Ufu,
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 uvu,
uvu,
uvu.
uvu.
Exactly, that's it. Then let's have a look at the ejectives. Now, before we get into that, have a look at this word, cattail. I did some research for this video and found the word cattail as an example of gemination on the letter T. Now, I don't personally agree with the linguists or essentially anyone that follows this logic, regardless of how esteemed or renowned they may be, and I'll tell you why. The letter T is a voiceless stop, and you can't lengthen a stop. You say t, and the sound is over. You cannot stretch this sound, right? It's not like for example, that you can lengthen indefinitely. And if you listen closely to a word like cattail, what you actually do isn't geminating the sound either. It's physically impossible. So what you do instead is add a glottal stop after ca, wait for a fraction of a second before you pronounce tail. So it's not cat, but ca, pause, tail. Cat tail. We perceive this as elongation of the letter T, but it physically isn't. For this reason, the voiceless stops K, T, and P can't be geminated in Ælis. Instead, we'll turn them into an ejective. To make an ejective, you basically let air compress inside your mouth, and then you release it with a kind of burst. So, for example, we have aka on the left, and on the right, to stress the double sound, we turn it into an ejective, aka. An example with the letter T, aitai versus aitai. With the letter P, we get epe versus epe. Now, ejectives are not super common worldwide. They're notably absent from any of the world's biggest languages like Mandarin, English, Russian, Standard Arabic, and so on. It might therefore be challenging to do these ejectives, but do not despair. If you're having trouble getting it done, you have a third technique as a backup, adding a schwa or another vowel-like sound. This technique may be used on all consonants, notably the voiced stops that can't be geminated nor ejected. Since the letters G, D, and B are also stops, it's almost impossible to say them quickly 2 times in a row without automatically putting some vowel-like sound in between. That's where this method comes from. This way, for example, we can distinguish igi on the left.
Igi,
Yep, very good. From igigi on the right.
igigi.
Exactly. Odo,
Odo,
oddo.
oddo.
That's it. Ubu,
Ubu,
and ubbu.
ububu.
You got it. And then the last technique is the most intuitive one, I think, together with the elongation. The glottal stop. A glottal stop may be added between any 2 adjacent identical letters, notably the vowels. This situation occurs often in Ælis too. For example, naara, daiaira, veera, niika, dooka.
Naara, daiaira, veera, niika, dooka.
That's right, very good. Now I would like to add a remark about the liska, a small side note. The glottal stop is only obligatory for the low-range liska, a, I, e, I, o. For the high-range liska, wa, wai, we, wi, wo, it's not needed. So on the left, for example, we read tai aika, where you can clearly hear the brief pause between the vowels. Tai aika. On the right, we read taiwaika without a pause. Again, but slower, taiwaika. Okay? Then another remark while we're at it is about vowel length. 2 identical vowels may not be geminated if they belong to different root words. To say this word, it is wrong to pronounce it as ika under any circumstance. The separation of the vowels is obligatory, iika. This is because vowel length is not a relevant part or a distinctive feature in Ælis. You may hold vowels for as long as you want to, perhaps for emphasis or when hesitating, while it will still be perceived as one vowel. So if you say iika, for example, then it means the same as ika, not iika. Okay? So, in summary, when 2 identical sounds that belong to different root words become adjacent, there are 4 methods of making sure that a listener can perceive both of them. Elongation or gemination may occur for the sounds rr, s, z, and v. The method of creating ejectives may only be done for infixing a weak and brief vowel sound may be done for all consonants, but not the vowels. And finally, a brief pause or glottal stop may be added between any 2 identical sounds of the inventory. If you can, the preferred method is always the uppermost option available. Amma, akka, adda, and aaka. Right? And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this step back from grammar to focus on pronunciation a bit, because I already know what the next video is going to be about. We'll have another look at the root word classes we talked about in video 30 and connect them to the topic of hierarchy, or as I like to call it, the stepladder principle that we discussed in video 15. Hope to see you then. As always, thank you for watching, and thank you for your support and feedback. Consider subscribing if you want to see future uploads, contact me for any questions or suggestions, and another big thanks for my lovely assistant,
Ora.